Hi, Kristy. This is Jason, your instructor here in POL 310. So here we are in week 4, and we've come to the discussion on climate change, and I just wanted to create sort of a video conversation for you about this because in many ways this might be one of the more important discussions that we have here in the course, because a lot of the things that we've talked about so far kind of lead up to the question, what are we going to do about climate change, and what are we going to do about the effects of climate change? So you saw the video from the EPA about climate change basics, and those are just sort of a lot of facts about why it's happening and what is happening. And I really think that in a lot of ways people do kind of know a little bit about this in this class. Maybe not the entire world, maybe not the United States, but for the most part, we're starting to get a real good idea of what the climate change basics are. And the real important thing is, like, what is happening as a result of climate change, and how is that going to affect us going forward? So you mentioned flooding and droughts and food supply issues and threats to animal species, and then some of the other students have to look at other documents that talk about things like sea level rise and melting ice caps and ocean acidification. And in the long run, what does this mean for us here in the United States? Well, there's definitely going to be some effects, and some of those that we seem to notice the most are flooding and drought and severe weather, because that seems very immediate to many people. So we know that it's happening, and we know that it's going to be causing problems, and the problems are only going to get worse. So what we kind of have to talk about then is, like, well, what do we do about it? And the three things that are presented in this discussion are, well, we could just adapt to it, we could try to mitigate that, or we could work to develop in a more sustainable way. And you're absolutely right, mitigating climate change and sustainable development do have a lot to do with each other, because we're essentially trying to prevent climate change from happening in the first place. The other strategy, and you have to think about this from a policy perspective, the other strategy that a lot of governments, local governments, state governments, federal government, the world governments, a lot of governments are trying to think about adaptation at this point. And there's some reasons for that, because while you might be able to create laws to mitigate climate change in your own environment, in your own sector, like for your own country, your own city, your own part of the world, whatever it is, you can't necessarily do that on a global scale for everybody. So while some people are mitigating climate change, others are still polluting. And you have to take that into consideration and come up with adaptation strategies. So, for example, the city of New York is already thinking about, what are we going to do about sea level rise? We have to come up with ways to adapt to sea level rise. Should we be building bigger levees? Should we find some way to make sure that the sea level doesn't flood Manhattan? And one adaptation strategy that is a possibility is, do we just abandon coastal areas altogether? Well, we have to take this into consideration, and if you are the head of a government, or you work in a government agency or something like that, you really do have to face the real possibility that you might be adapting to climate change before you're able to mitigate the effects. So you talked about mitigation, and you look at the new climate economy and the executive summary. Everybody should be looking at this, and the recommendations down at the very bottom of the document or at the very end of the document are all pretty short and to the point, but are they all necessarily possible? I mean, this think tank is making some recommendations that might not be totally possible from a political perspective. So it sounds good that we should accelerate low carbon development and restore forest landscapes, right? And, we should invest $1 trillion in clean energy. I mean, all of these things sound really good, but when you come down to it, politically, it's really, really difficult to get these things to happen because, as I said, you're making efforts to mitigate things which, in essence, might actually be hurting your economy, while China and India aren't doing the same things. So climate change is still going to happen, even though you're taking steps to mitigate it at your own cost, or at a cost to you. So, these recommendations are good ones, and we have to start thinking about, from a policy perspective and from a political perspective, what are the things that are possible for us to do. Galvanizing low carbon innovation is probably a really good idea, and I would think of the pros and cons of something like this. The pros are, we're going to be coming up with new technologies that can be then used and sold to the rest of the world, driving economic growth. So as long as we can drive economic growth and come up with new technologies that are going to mitigate the amount of carbon that's being released, it's kind of a win-win. People have jobs, we're able to grow economically, and that means that it will gather political support. Because if you don't have political support, then these policies really mean nothing. And this is interesting. Car2Go is an electric car service that is actually leaving San Diego in a month. They decided that, it was a great idea. We have electric cars. We're going to put them all over San Diego. It's going to help with the transportation problem and help with the carbon emissions problem. But in the end, it wasn't economically viable, and the company is leaving San Diego. So was this something that wasn't supported politically? Did the government really get behind Car2Go and provide a bunch of incentives for them? Or did they make it difficult for Car2Go to operate? Actually, they kind of made it difficult for Car2Go to operate because they started removing some of the allowances that they had given this company when it started out. So, for example, parking. They waived parking meters for anybody that was using Car2Go, so that you could just take this car, go somewhere, and then park it next to a meter, and you wouldn't have to worry about paying the meter. In this respect, the government didn't do much to help with a technology that was going to help reduce carbon emissions. So you have to have everything in concert. The political climate has to match, the desire to mitigate climate change in a lot of ways. And unfortunately, a lot of politicians use climate change mitigation and they get behind it only for political purposes. They don't really do what is required or what could be done as recommended in this particular document. So that's kind of where we're at. I think that your post was very comprehensive. You covered everything. And so now the question, other than education, which you happen to mention, are there policies that we can put into place that don't hurt economic growth and that do have a benefit to mitigating climate change? And, one of the things that always comes to mind for me, no matter what, is energy. And can we do things when it comes to energy and renewable energy to incentivize people to use it? LED light bulbs are a great example. Can a government or a state government subsidize LED light bulbs so that people think that they're inexpensive and can buy them? Because that's a great strategy right there for mitigating climate change. They use less energy, they save people money, and politicians can get behind them because there's really nobody's hurting when it comes to LED light bulbs. For example, you're not putting coal miners out of business by promoting LED light bulbs. So those are my thoughts for this week. I hope that we can start to think about everything as leading to this discussion on climate change. Okay, bye.